Creating a character readers will love versus one they'll hate can be a fine line. Create a character who is too perfect, and people will find them boring. On the other hand, if you create a character who is too flawed, people might hate them. Flawed characters are essential, but if your character crosses certain boundaries, such as committing rape or hurting animals, people aren't going to be invested in their journey. Ultimately, the hero of your story needs to be interesting. They don't have to be likable, but they have to be engaging and keep us guessing. Even first-person perspectives allow for some level of surprise. Moreover, we've all loved characters in fiction who we'd probably avoid in real life. We're in the age of the anti-hero or the morally gray protagonist. People love a bad boy. They love thieves and criminals. People might even accept a murder for a protagonist if it's handled well. All this said, there are certain traits to avoid, especially in your protagonist. Your character can have bad days, and everyone could have hints of these traits. But if they're constant, people are going to lose interest. These are personality traits readers can't stand, which makes them a big no-no for your protagonist. Before we continue, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about characters and lore, discuss my favorite fantasy books, share my bookish opinions, and offer the odd writing advice. If any of that sounds like your cup of tea, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. Also a disclaimer, some spoilers for the A Court of Thorns and Roses series and The Cursed Prince are noted as examples. If you haven't read these books yet, you've been warned. Your protagonist needs to be interesting and flawed. But no matter what kind of character they are, whether it be a troubled hero or a full-blown anti-hero, here are 5 traits to avoid in your main hero or heroine. Number 1. Whininess. Whininess is easily the most annoying trait you can give your character. Whininess can be applied to a side character, especially if it's supposed to be someone the author wants readers to dislike, but never to the hero of the story. When writers make their hero whiny, they're likely attempting to make them angsty, but there can be a fine line between angst and whininess. Even angst, if not delivered in small doses, can be annoying. Some people love angst, and others hate it, but both camps will agree that too much can become wearing. Furthermore, if taken to extremes, your protagonist falls into the trap of being whiny. Your character can be jaded, they can be cruel, temperamental, troubled, and have an overall negative outlook on life. They can be pessimistic, expecting the worst, and they can struggle to enjoy themselves or trust others. They might even come across as arrogant, disinterested, or rude. These are all examples of angst and are acceptable traits for a hero. However, if your hero complains about every little thing, showing irritation over the texture of the grass, and they feel the need to air their feelings on every tiny inconvenience, that's whininess. A character who pouts, who sinks into melodrama over a mild scolding, and who thinks the world is out to get them because they were told to hang up a sweater is whiny. To be fair, everyone has their whiny moments. And if your protagonist is a teenager, it would be unrealistic if they didn't grouse a little. Of course, many readers struggle with books for or about teenagers for the very reason teens like to whine. It's realistic, but it doesn't stop people from being annoyed if it happens too often. If your character has to have a whiny moment, play it to comedic effect. Emphasize how ridiculous they're being through the actions of the characters who surround them. Or, better yet, if you know your hero is being frustrating, show another character lecturing them for it. Whininess is the main reason people found Anakin's character frustrating. Given that Padme seemed charmed rather than irritated, it also caused many to struggle with their suspension of disbelief. Anakin's "I hate sand" speech has become infamous across the fandom. It's meant to be a deep confessional moment, but Anakin just comes across as a whiny kid, and it doesn't help that Padme never tells him off or tries to improve his character. The bottom line is, whininess should be avoided, or if moments of it can't be helped, other characters should react accordingly. If your hero decides to whine, the supporting cast needs to snap him out of it with a few sharp words. Number 2 on this list is helplessness. Readers want a protagonist with backbone. They want someone who will fight back if they're wronged, or who can act for herself. This doesn't mean your hero needs to be a perfect badass warrior or genius. In fact, your hero should fail, and do so multiple times. What readers want to see is an effort. Even if their plan goes to shit, they want to see that your protagonist tried. What this looks like is your hero making plans or struggling, even in the wake of impossible circumstances. Your hero should have a good blend of successes and failures, all as the result of their efforts. Bella Swan grates readers the wrong way because she's helpless. It's not the fact that she's a human in a vampire world that bothers people. It's the fact she doesn't do anything, however futile, to improve her circumstances. She relies on others to solve her problems. Realistically, she would be helpless against vampires. That said, there are little things she could do. She could have hid matches and gas under her bed. She could have disguised her scent. And she could have trained herself, if only to buy herself time in drastic situations. It doesn't matter that most of these efforts would have failed. What matters is that readers would have seen her making them. Jude Duart, by contrast, is far from helpless. Despite being in a situation similar to Bella's, playing the role of a helpless mortal among supernatural beings, she still finds ways to defend herself. Fairies, like vampires, have innumerable advantages over humans. They don't age, allowing them to remain strong and limber. They're powerful fighters, and most importantly, they can use magic, having access to everything from breathing underwater to mind control. With all this in mind, humans seem completely helpless against Holly Black's fairies, and quite often they are. Kidnapped from their homes and glamoured, most humans are useless against fae kind. But this isn't the case for Jude. Even with the odds stacked against her, she still does what she can. She learns to fight, keeping herself fit and mastering the blade. She poisons herself in small doses, so that she might develop immunity to the many concoctions fairies brew. She relies on her wits, planning 3 steps ahead, and she seeks or accepts opportunities where they come. Plenty of Jude's plans fall apart, just as plenty allow her to live. Moreover, she recognizes what weaknesses fairies have against humans, and she exploits them. Fairies can't lie, but Jude, as a human, can, an advantage she uses repeatedly. Meyer's vampires also have their weaknesses. They're distracted by blood, they can only be destroyed by fire, and they'll be exposed if they step into sunlight. Meyer said that not every hero can be Buffy, and that's fine, but Bella still could have used these weaknesses to her advantage. She could have attempted lighting a vampire on fire, or used her own blood to torment them. Whatever the case, your hero has to try. Even if they're physically helpless, they shouldn't act like it. Certainly they can have their moments of vulnerability. They can have times when they cry, when they fall to their knees, or when they give in, but they can't stay in these states indefinitely. Even where there are moments when they give in to helplessness, they should resume fighting on the first opportunity they see. To be clear, I'm not conflating helplessness with despair or mental health issues. If your hero needs to stay in bed for a few weeks, or needs a helping hand to pull them out of the figurative hole they've fallen into, that's valid. However, they shouldn't spend the entire book in bed. At the beginning of the second book, in the Court of Thorns and Roses series, Feyre is reeling from the trauma she's undergone. She's listless, suffering from nightmares, and growing sicker by the day. Though she argues against the situation she's in, some could argue she comes across as helpless. However, she doesn't continue in this state for the whole book. Instead, she makes decisions that will help her heal. And by the end of the book, even with trauma in her past, she comes away as a powerful and independent woman, regularly training various abilities and challenging those around her. She's far from helpless. Like Jude, she started as a human in a monster's world, but that didn't prevent her from fighting back. Number 3 on this list is abusive. This trait goes for your love interest as well, but neither your hero or her romantic interest should be abusive, unless it's for a very good reason, such as keeping the other person alive. When I describe abuse, it can mean physical, verbal, or sexual. Rape is never okay, even between married couples, and anything beyond a punch or a slap, a full-blown beating over a trivial action, is going to make your character come across as cold or hateful. This isn't to say your hero can't make mistakes. If someone frustrates your protagonist one too many times, they might punch them. If it's someone like Malfoy, that person might even deserve to be punched. If your hero is loaded with superpowers and some fairy lord pisses her off, she might even unleash the brunt of her abilities on the idiot who annoyed her. It happens. Your hero can lose control. All that said, there should always be consent between two partners. And throwing someone down the stairs or stabbing them with a knife isn't okay, unless that person threatens your hero's life. In which case, if said person is your hero's romantic interest, they shouldn't stay the romantic interest. If there are instances of abuse in your story, whether they be from the hero or a love interest, they need to be addressed. This might mean facing the consequences of their actions. At any rate, it shouldn't be portrayed as okay. If your hero does have abusive tendencies, he or she needs to lose out as a result. Trust could be lost, a coldness can develop between parties, and in the worst case scenario, people can be dumped. Anyone who's spent enough time on BookTok knows that people hate Tamlin, and that's for good reason. He essentially holds his love interest prisoner, and even causes her minor injury. He's never shown as evil, but he has abusive tendencies. What could have turned into a toxic love story instead becomes one of female empowerment when, spoiler alert, Tamlin has his ass dumped. The fact is, your hero shouldn't be abusive, unless you plan to address it and have them face consequences. The first Bridgerton book has a contentious scene, one which has been labeled, even by devout members of the fandom, as rape. It wasn't even the fact that the rape occurred so much as the fact that the couple in question didn't address it. If someone has to cross lines in your story, there has to be repercussions. But generally speaking, your hero or love interest shouldn't be abusive, especially if you mean for the relationship to last. The fourth trait on this list is sociopathic. This is one of those traits which you could technically use if you know what you're doing, but it's easy to get wrong. There have been plenty of stories which followed the adventures of a monster. Whether it be American Psycho or Hannibal, there have been dozens of stories which have placed readers in the shoes of the truly evil. That said, these kinds of stories will remain controversial. While there will always be an audience for them, just as many can be turned off. If you're looking to write the next Harry Potter, or you want a character people can be invested in for a long time, you might want to avoid this one, unless you know what you're doing. If a character comes across as too cold or ruthless, people can lose sympathy. People will forgive your protagonist for a lot, including stabbing a guy and dumping him under the bed, in the right context, but it shouldn't feel forced. If your hero is a murderer, the murder should still feel justified. The hero should either kill the person because they feel threatened, or because they believe doing so will save the lives of others. If your hero kills an innocent, They should do so out of the belief that A, the person isn't innocent, or B, that doing so will save another person's life, such as that of a loved one or a child. This doesn't mean your reader will agree 100% with your hero's choice, but as long as they can understand why they did it and still be invested in your character, you've done this right. It also helps if your hero has a conscience. If your hero does something reprehensible, but reveals that on the inside they're racked by guilt, that can go a long way to helping readers to connect with the hero. Conversely, if the hero doesn't have a conscience, they should still have other traits the readers can identify with or admire. Hannibal Lecter is a psychopath, but he's also intelligent, polite, and cultured. He can't love, but he will help those he sees as deserving it, and he's respectful towards Clarice by the end of Silence of the Lambs. He's still a psychopath, but his willingness to respect a woman who's proved herself and his various quirks makes for a maniac we can't help loving. At the end of the day, this is a tricky trait to balance. If your hero kills simply to kill, slaughtering people because they're feeling angsty, that's going to rub people the wrong way. It's going to make your hero come across as heartless, and even the most jaded psychopath should have something people can connect with. This trait isn't off the table, but it needs to be handled correctly to be effective. Number 5 on this list is ignorance. Ironically, people can be even less forgiving of this trait than others. Readers would rather your hero murder someone or cheat on his wife than see him be racist. It's not that ignorance is worse than murder. At least in the real world, it usually isn't. It's that people are more sensitive to ignorance. Murder feels like something abstract, like a wild plot device, while ignorance is something we see every day. This isn't to say there can't be ignorant characters in your story, but your protagonist shouldn't be one of them. Of course, your character could still have a controversial opinion. What is considered hate and what is considered an unpopular opinion is going to vary between readers. However, if you can accept that some readers will disagree with something, if you can acknowledge this and still write what you feel is right, nobody can stop you. All this aside, more blatant examples of racism, homophobia, or just overall ignorance is never going to endear someone to a character. You can make your hero a murderer, but not a racist, unless you want the audience to hate the character and plan to write a grisly end for him. In that case, power to you, but a character like that would still make more sense as a villain. Even if your character is in a fantasy setting, she should still learn to be open-minded with time. In the beginning of A Court of Thorns and Roses, it could be argued that Feyre is a racist. She's afraid of fairies and even hates them on some level. But by the end of the story, she comes to love them. By seeing that they're also people, with plenty of similarities to humans, her mind is changed. Fantasy can offer a good setting to explore such themes. If you want to explore why prejudice occurs and how it can be overcome, fantasy can allow you to do so without stepping on as many toes. Telling a similar story in the real world with real marginalized groups, however, will require much more nuance, and even then, people might not appreciate your hero. Ultimately, any prejudiced or ignorant character should A, be the villain, or B, be a part of a fantasy story, in which such themes can be safely explored. In conclusion, not all protagonists have to be likable, but audiences need to be invested in their journeys. At the very least, audiences still have to be interested in your hero. They don't have to think he or she is a good person, but they have to understand the choices they're making and why they're the way they are. Certain traits, such as whininess, helplessness, or ignorance, should be avoided on a general basis, unless the writer can handle them with nuance. And most importantly, as a result of any of these traits, the writer has to avoid constructing a character who is frustrating. If something goes wrong in the story, you want people to be frustrated on your protagonist's behalf, not because of your protagonist. Of course, opinion will always vary. I personally liked Jude's character, finding her a reasonable blend of positive traits and flaws. I didn't always find her perfect, but I found her more interesting for her flaws. She can come across as power-hungry or selfish, but her choices always made sense to me, and most of them seemed justified. Some readers didn't like her, finding her self-centered, but opinions are always going to differ in a fandom. As a writer, you can't please everyone. However, you want to avoid displeasing a majority. Writing a character people can disagree on is great, but you don't want to write the next Anakin, even if he does hate sand. What are traits you can't stand in heroes as a reader? Would you attempt to use any of these anyways? And if so, how? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and happy writing!